I'm letting everyone in. I want to welcome everyone at our second community engagement workshop for the city of Jacksonville. And we're very excited here at the Urban League Center for Advocacy and Social Justice to have with us some excellent presentations and presenters who will provide you with some perspective on, let's call it, ways to engage a community and successful programs to help generate some dialogue among our attendees about the best way to proceed in terms of engagement. It's our perspective at the center that we need more engagement in our community for a variety of reasons. And we've been looking at this for quite some time, testing, piloting different ways to do this. And again, very grateful for the people that are on board with us. And I'm going to turn it over now to Solomon Crow, who will be moderating and introducing our speakers. So, Solomon.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Solomon Crow, and I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator at the Center for Advocacy and Social Justice for the Jacksonville Urban League. Today, I will be introducing to you the speakers who will be presenting today. Mr. Robert Jones, who is the former director of the FCRC Consensus Center at FSU, and he is the current secretariat for Florida Civic Advance. Mr. Jones, if there's anything you'd like to say, just introductory words.
I'm happy to be here, and I'll go into more details about the models and my organization when I get into the presentation, but that is sufficient.
And our second speaker will be Mr. Andrew Thomas, who is the Community Relations and Neighborhood Engagement Director for the City of Sanford and a member of the Divided Communities Project. Mr. Andrew Thomas, the floor is yours as well.
Okay, thank you, Solomon. I'd just say good afternoon, everyone. Delighted that you invited me back, and I look forward to this afternoon.
And just another shout out to our guest speaker, Ms. Carla Miller. She is the Ethics Director of the City of Jacksonville, and we're happy to have her with us as well. Ms. Miller, if you have anything to say, the floor is yours as well.
No, thank you. I look forward to the discussion.
It's great. I'd just like to thank you all on behalf of the Jacksonville Urban League for joining us this afternoon for this event. This event is just going to be centered on different ways to improve community engagement between the city of Jacksonville and its citizens. What will be presented to you today will be a couple of city models that have been proven to improve community engagement between cities and their citizens. And what we're going to do is start out by having Mr. Jones present a couple of models to you. After he presents, we'll allow a couple of clarifying questions for his presentation, and then we'll have Mr. Thomas continue along, as well as Ms. Miller and Mr. Stone. So pretty much after each presentation, we want to make sure that we don't get too deep into the conversation yet. We want to hold that for the second hour. The second hour, we're going to have a deeper conversation altogether, as well as breakout rooms, and then we'll go from there. Again, just thank you all for being here today. It means a lot to us, and hopefully you take something from these presentations with you by the end of this event. I'm now going to turn the floor over to Mr. Jones, and we'll begin.
So Keziah, can you put up the slides? So I'll, as Keziah is putting up the slides, I'll just describe, I'm going to provide, if you can advance to the third slide, I'm going to provide initially just a definition of civic engagement and civic infrastructure, and then provide a couple of state and regional models, and then a local model, cities of service, and I'll go into some detail on the programs both here in Florida and nationally. And then Andrew Thomas is going to take up a local example of civic infrastructure in the city of Sanford, and he'll be presenting after that. And then we'll talk about the citizen planning advisory committees as a structure, and start to look at what there might be to draw from elements of models and to improve that. Can you advance the slide to the next?
And Robert, while she's doing that, I failed to let people know that we're going to send a link, a jot form link via the chat with some questions on engagement that would really help with our deliberations towards the end of the session. If you could fill that out while you're listening and pay absolutely close attention to our speakers at the same time, that would be most appreciated. But it's a very short form. It won't take very long.
So the first piece is to define what I mean by civic infrastructure, and what many others around Florida and around the country, what that means and describes. And then I'll give you a few examples and then proceed to some of the models. So civic infrastructure is creating public spaces for people to gather, to connect, to solve problems, make decisions, and even celebrate. And a recent report, a 2020 report, Our Common Purpose, which was produced by the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, suggested that civic infrastructure provides the scaffolding for all of the ways in which people engage in public life, from voting to volunteering and having a say in public decisions. So that kind of concept and metaphor for this is really appropriate, because civic infrastructure, if you could advance to the next slide, is illustrated by many examples, and many of which have been either currently or in the past have been tried in Jacksonville, includes engagement commissions, community visioning initiatives for either neighborhoods or for broadly for the county or for planning districts, voter education and registration drives, volunteer fairs, citizen assemblies and town hall, citizen academies, either police academies or more broadly citizen leadership academies, participatory budgeting, civic youth programs. So these are just examples of what we mean by civic infrastructure, and what variety of scaffolding is there. And sometimes you look at some of these examples and you'll say, well, we have not had experience with that. But there's a lot of examples, a lot of experience elsewhere, if not in Jacksonville, with many of these examples. Advance the slide, please. So generally speaking, there is census data that's started to be collected in the about around 2006 and on. And every year there is census data collected on state by state on things like issues like working with neighbors to fix a problem, volunteering, voting, donating to charity, etc. And basically this national civic rankings really shows Florida to be pretty weak in large part. So working with neighbors to fix a problem, we're 50th among 50 states and the District of Columbia. Volunteering 46, attending a public meeting 48. If you can go to the next slide, this is this slide, and I apologize for the, you are not going to be able to read a lot of that, but it basically just continues the saga. We only score up in the 30s, 36, in terms of voter turnout. And so years ago in 2014, if you can go forward to the next slide, some people were looking at this and saying, what can be done? And so I want to kind of talk with you about some initiatives that are underway at the state and then at the regional level, and then move to the local level and describe the cities of service model that is a national model, and I'll come to that in a moment. So at the state level, so next slide, thanks. So in 2014, a number of people, a number of representatives of organizations, AARP, the Florida League of Cities, and many other organizations, nonprofits, businesses, were struggling to explain why the ratings for civic health were so poor in Florida, in Florida's communities. And so the Florida Civic Advance was created as a membership organization of organizations. So it was organizations that were represented within the broader network were engaged with either directly or in some portion of their mission with civic engagement, civic life, and trying to solve problems with people at the table. So the Florida Civic Advance is now 7 years old, and it's had 3 or 4 statewide annual meetings and a regional meeting, and I'll describe that really briefly going forward. But its really mission is to advance and improve civic life in Florida's communities. And perhaps the metrics will help us understand how successful we're being in terms of our census metrics that are available. And so we want to increase citizen involvement in having communities make their efforts contribute to working and prospering. And we are particularly interested in collaborating and in working across sectors. Private sector, nonprofit, and the public sector have organizations and agencies, et cetera, that are involved in this aspect at a general level. And we convene civic leaders, institutions, and organizations every couple of years for a review of what ideas have emerged in terms of communities, and look for civic excellence in terms of sharing best practices and promoting civic life and civic health in general. Next slide. So the organization early on was trying to figure out, well, what areas of civic life and community life are involved in a healthy community. So nonprofit collaboration, volunteering, philanthropy, community inclusion, and neighborliness were all items of concern and interest. Voter education, intergenerational civic engagement with local government, which is what we're going to be talking about here today, business engagement in civic life, and as well as more broadly civic education at the K-12 through higher education and beyond in adult education. So the idea is the combination of these items could produce a more healthy community and could help to sort of figure out how to catalyze replication of initiatives in these areas that would represent civic excellence and be able to share best practices with, broadly speaking. Next slide. So in 2019, December 2019, we had our third statewide summit, and it focused on voter education and civic service, intergenerational civic engagement, and civic engagement with local government. And we produced an awards program for each of these three areas. We had the awardees and many others come to this summit, and we gave the awards out, but also captured and documented the practices that were in each of these three areas that were really exemplary. And so that is really, in a nutshell, the way in which we have been most effective is in convening and then sharing practices in the civic realm. Next slide. So these are from 2015 with the original summit, 2016, which was a general regional Miami summit, 2017, which was a state summit, and then 2019, which I just described. Next slide. So I was going to say that the three statewide summits we're looking at from a perspective of where we could find good practices. This regional summit that happened in 2016 in the greater Miami area was a summit where we were really focused on trying to connect sectors, nonprofit, public sector, and the business sector. And we spent a day, had a lot of presentations and discussion, and engaged at a much more regional level versus a statewide level in that summit. Next slide. So the next slide. So let me proceed on. We'll go now to the local level. So the Cities of Service is a national program. It was founded back in 2009 by Mayor Michael Bloomberg, and it was incubated at his foundation, the Bloomberg Philanthropies. And 2014 independent organization, and I'll go forward, but just to give you a sense of how that first started. Next slide. So the focus for the Cities of Service is to change the way local governments and citizens work through service. And it's focused on assisting mayors in building stronger communities. So it is focused on city level and leadership in the cities. And the quote here is from their materials. They help cities tap into the knowledge, creativity, and service of their citizens, help to identify and solve critical public problems. There are more than 280 cities, most of them in the United States, a few of them in Europe and Canada, that have since 2009 have signed on. Next slide. So in Florida, there are 11 mid-size and large cities, and then one county that have signed on and created a plan for how to put service in the context of public engagement and work with the highest levels of mayors and city council. And for Miami-Dade, it's the county mayor and the county commission. And so these members, Jacksonville is not a member. It possibly would be an idea to at least explore. And let me tell you about two of their programs and just briefly let you know of several others. So next slide. So the two I'm going to mention here is the Chief Service Officer Leadership Initiative and then the Love Your Block initiative. There is also they working with AERP for a program called Experience Matters, where they pair seniors with youth and work on efforts to solve problems in cities. They just started last year with a National Engaged City Awards, where they commend and give recognition to cities who have established the scaffolding for civic in their communities and are termed engaged cities. There's also a few other opportunities. So impact volunteering, they have an initiative. Also opportunity zones that they provide some assistance with. Next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit. So the Chief Service Officer Leadership Initiative is an institutional way in which a senior level administration staff member is installed in each city in order to plan, coordinate, and evaluate a citywide service plan. And so it is a plan that engages citizen volunteers in solving public problems. Next slide. So the initial program started in 2010, 2011. And there were, I think, 8 cities, and 2 of them were in Florida. Orlando stepped up, and City of Miami stepped up. And these are the 2 chief service officers that led the initiative to create the plan. So Orlando Cares was the result of that service plan, and Educate Miami was the result of the plan. It may be a useful thought to kind of really focus in on how to best institutionalize good practices in terms of public engagement. And this would be a commitment by the city to engage in a effort where they establish a point person, a leadership point person to help develop and initiate and implement a service plan. Next slide. At a different level, they have another program where the focus is on trying to revitalize city neighborhoods one block at a time. And city leaders engage with citizen volunteers to do this. And it just so happens is an opportunity for 8 $100,000 Love You grants to cities, and it's a deadline of August 9th, which is only a couple of weeks away. But this is a pretty serious and ongoing program that has been very successful. I think it started back in 2017. And so this is an effort to focus in on not even on a entire neighborhood, but on a block, and try and build from the ground up to try and figure out how to revitalize neighborhoods one block at a time. So this is another example of how Cities of Service tries to enhance and create and institutionalize opportunities for engagement, public engagement, to be offered and successful in trying to address challenges in different communities. Next slide. So I'm going to, in a moment, turn it over to Andrew Thomas, who is going to describe a story of work in Sanford that began back in 2012, and really is a great example of how civic infrastructure is something that you can build and engage and institutionalize. Solomon, in terms of questions for clarifying anything that I presented, do you want do that now, or do you want to wait until the next couple of presentations?
Just while it's fresh on everybody's minds, if there's any questions that you have for Mr. Jones right now pertaining to what he just spoke about, feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself and I guess give us your name and then your question. All right. I don't see any hand raises, so I guess we'll move on to Mr. Thomas, and then I have a discussion towards the end. Oh, we got a hand. All right, Dennis. You're muted.
Bane of my existence. Question. How did the city's programs get funded in Orlando and elsewhere? Because that's a big problem we have. We've been doing this on a very small grant from the Community Foundation, but it's long run out. And we're hoping to get more funding for a process that would engage the citizenry and contribute to the betterment of its growth and development.
Well, several of their programs are funded through partnerships with others. So the program that is focused on a chief service officer, Rockefeller Brothers, the Bloomberg Philanthropies provided initial funding. They went through a process to select representative cities, and I think there were 8 cities that got about. They basically, Rockefeller paid the salary for 2 years of the chief service officer, but the city then continued, both Orlando and Miami continued for the next 7 or 8 years with the program and funded it locally. So these are initiatives. So the Love Your Block is a similar program. Like, they're going to give a grant to a city for $100,000 to engage volunteers in working on a focused block level effort for engagement and for problem solving.
But it's dependent on the city to make the application.
Dependent on the city to make the application, and then dependent on the city after the funding concludes to continue to fund it. Orlando has been an unusual situation. Mayor Dyer has been there for, I think, 14 years as mayor of Orlando. And so that was helped them continue to make the investments year in, year out. But the initial, the cities of service usually provides initial funding, but then and the creation of a plan, and then the plan gets implemented and funded by cities is typically the model. There are some philanthropies, that community foundations, et cetera, that contribute, but not sufficiently to kind of run an entire program on a grant.
Thank you.
And before we move on, I have a question as well. For the cities who joined the initiative or joined Florida Civic Advance, how easy or difficult was it for these cities to join, and would there need to be full consensus to join, or would you see different organizations within the city attempting to join?
Well, so all of the above. So for the first 6 years up until 2020, it was run as a network that was open to everyone, organizational network that was open to businesses, nonprofits, local governments. So we have several local government members, both at the county level and the city level. And we have representatives of the Florida League of Cities and the Association of Counties. So lot of times people come either to conferences or join as members to kind of get both the benefits from learning about practices, but also for engaging on kind of challenges that are faced in trying to do this work at the local level. So up till now, we're about to create a nonprofit. We were embedded and incubated at the Florida State University, but we're now creating a nonprofit. Again, it's an organization of organizations, and we're welcoming members going forward from this year for the next several years to continue and try and work and convene and study best practices.
Thank you for that answer. If there's, I'll ask again, just in case, if there's anybody else who'd like to ask Mr. Jones a question about Florida Civic Advance or building civic infrastructure, now's the time. All right. On that, we will move forward with Mr. Andrew Thomas's presentation.
Thank you, Solomon. Good afternoon, everyone. The slide is still up, and you will see there's the two pictures. One talks about race, equality, equity, and inclusion, a committee. That's a new committee that we implemented this past year. In fact, we're still in the process of finalizing it. And the other picture you will see there is of the Citizens Academy, class 14, and class 14. And there's 2 classes a year. It takes it roughly back to 2013, 2014 that we started it. The reason I mention that is because the initiatives and activities that I'm going to talk about were an outgrowth of a 9-point plan that was drafted by the city to move the city of Sanford forward following the tragic death of Trayvon Martin. One of the as you'll recall, during that time, one of the demands of the community was to arrest Zimmerman, and they called for an investigation by the Department of Justice of the Sanford Police Department, and that's kind of rose to the top in terms of arrest and the investigation of the Sanford Police Department, and working with the community and saying, okay, we know that if there's an investigation, they're not looking for a local investigation. They don't want it to go through the internal affairs. They don't want it to go through Florida law enforcement. They're looking for something, if it's got to be at a federal level, and the Department of Justice would have to come in and do that. And anticipating that, we reached out in advance to the Department of Justice, the Division of Special Litigation and Civil Rights Pattern and Practice Program that conducts the investigation of law enforcement for patterns of discrimination. And in that, the department, DOJ, responded to us and said, we appreciate your request. However, at this time, we have been looking at it and we see no reason to conduct a full study of the Sanford Police Department. However, we will keep you on the radar. We knew to respond to the community at that time because we were still in the height of demanding, as they'll call those first 44 days, demanding that Zimmerman be arrested, and this became one of the issues. So what do you do? It's an issue in knowing that you got to deliver. So one of the things you realize, you're talking about civic engagement. You realize once you get into civic engagement, once you have a crisis, the community has a need, that generates an opportunity for change, and that's the opportunity for civic engagement. You're going to have civic engagement during this time. The protests that you have, the rallies that you have, that's civic engagement. they're coming together, they have a common need, and they're requesting change. You got to do something that's different from what you have been doing. Okay? So you decide, how are you going to respond to that and meet those demands that are out there. Ours was, let's take a look at kind of what those demands and requests are. We developed what was a 9-point plan that we tried to look at those issues that was being brought to the city manager and the commissioners, and proposed the plan. That plan was accepted by the community and says, fine, now implement it. And I'll just go through kind of quickly some of the things that was touched upon in the plan. One was creating an Office of Community Relations and Neighborhood Engagement. Probably sounds familiar. That's the seat that I sit in now in holding that office. And then was creating an office and assigning certain activities to the office and working with the community. If there was not going to be a DOJ investigation of the police department, what were we going to offer as an alternative? Proposed that the community, we would empower the community. Community, you're empowered to take on this task and conduct your investigation of the police department. If you know where, if so to speak, if it's there's skeletons in the closet, you think you know, then let's do that. So we pulled together the Blue Ribbon Panel, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And that was really the kickoff in terms of the civic engagement and laying the foundation for what we are still doing. And now we are 9 years later, and we're still involved in the activities and involving the community in new and different ways as we go forward. Another activity that was there was a lot of discussion around, and that was the establishment of an interracial interfaith alliance, bringing our ministerial groups together across the board and having them weigh in. And at that time, that became very critical as we was moving back up for a second. Zimmerman was arrested, and now we started towards trial. That didn't mean things went away. There was still the demands in the community, still organizing in the community, still a need to meet. Now you've got the civic engagement that's taking place because there are meetings taking place in the community on a regular basis. The missing stakeholder in that is usually the city. So the community's organized its planning. So becoming part of that planning process, becoming part of the civic engagement that's taking place within your community. So we worked on that, bringing our ministers in because we knew that the ministers had the greatest oversight control. They had their finger on the pulse of what was happening in the community. And if there was a message that we needed to get out, that message, the best venue to get it out is through our faith leaders. So we organized that group and also using them to get information back to in terms of where we were, what was happening as we move forward towards the trial. So we had that activity that was taking place at that time. We committed to stay in touch, and we worked not only through from the time of Zimmerman's arrest through the trial and the verdict with the Department of Justice and their Community Relations Services unit. That was an ongoing, and we with the community, more involvement between the community and the DOJ staff, and that gradually pulled in more of the city involvement. I became very involved in many of the community meetings. We established a relationship that at the time I was the coordinator of the community development program, and that was set aside, but somebody else picked up their responsibility. So I was freed up to be available to the community as we went forward in that role. Things we heard, our young people didn't have jobs during the summer, and what was the city going to do about that? And we stepped up. We increased the youth training. We worked with organizations like Career Source. We have a local program, The Front Porch, and we started summer employment programs. We expanded those. We started a International Peace Day program, working with our young students. That's what was being asked for. I think the biggest request, in addition to the investigation, was to redo, modify, and amend the community development plan. The community felt very strongly that it did not include the wishes of the city, the residents. They felt it was a document that was conceived by the county and uh, and implemented within their community. They wanted to say, "Oh, our role in that one was, then let's take it off the table. Let's start this planning process over, and let us hear from you." So we did, if you're familiar with those terms, a substantial amendment to it. Our message to the community is that we were open, we were flexible, and we wanted to work with you as we went forward. So kind of that's what we were in terms of approach to civic engagement. If you will, next slide, please. Okay. And that's what I just mentioned, the 9-point plan and the 9 recommendations, and they kind of just kind of walked you through those briefly, so I won't do that again, but move on. Next slide, please. Okay. The blue ribbon panel, in getting the, working with the community and saying, you've heard, we've shared with you, Department of Justice is not going to conduct a pattern and practice investigation of the department. How can we do that? You can do it. It's been done before. Let's pull together a panel within the community. Let's talk about what the goals, what the objectives are, and let's do it. You can do this. And we pulled together a 25-member panel from all walks of life across the community. And we talked about, so what's going to be the charge to it? As you can see, one was, how do we strengthen relationships with the community? And how do we, because in listening to them, I should, let me digress for a moment and say, prior to coming on, working with a staff position with the city of Sanford, I was an independent consultant in the Sanford community. This was by way of retirement from New York State. My prior background had been in mediation, facilitation, conciliation processes, and providing those at community level and the court level and internationally. So I had those skills, and there were some issues between the communities of color and the Sanford Police Department that I was contracted to do an assessment and work on increasing diversity opportunities within the Sanford Police Department. So I had the opportunity to get to know the community at a different time and in a different way than when we were in the crisis with Trayvon. So many of those individuals that I had worked with knew me from the prior. So I used that relationship to begin to build this process. So instead, you come up with the report, you identify what your findings are, come up with some recommendations that talks about strategies, and here's the things that we're looking at. As I said, strengthen relationships with the community based upon inclusion, trust, and mutual respect. I can't tell you how many times I heard that did not exist. If that's lacking, then how do you build it, strategies to do it? Provide effective communications that crosses racial, culture, and ethnicity barriers, because I also heard that in terms of the language that was used by law enforcement. Next slide, please. So we brought the 25 members together, and it couldn't be the usual members that were appointed to committees and commissions from the city, and said, so how should it be constructed? Who should be on it? And we said, if it's going to be representative, we need the business community, the chamber, we need the legal, judiciary, we need elected officials, we need the clergy, the faith-based, we need educational, we need civic groups, and we need the Fraternal Order of Police to be part of this. By the time we identified all these individuals now, and also the city commission had an opportunity, there are 4 commissioners and the mayor, each one had an opportunity to appoint 2 people to that to the committee. So it started with the 10. There was 15 members that was added, and we made sure those particular disciplines were represented on the committee. Their charge. I see a question coming in. Do you want me to take questions now, Solomon, or would you like for me to wait?
You can definitely take questions now. It's at your discretion.
Okay. But let me go back in. I saw one that popped up.
I believe the question was, how did he prevent the panel from becoming an arm of the political parties?
Okay. And that was a work on the committee and clarifying what their role, the responsibilities. I think from the political side of it, we knew that the commissions, or we figured commissioners are going to appoint people they're most familiar with and think like them, and knowing what they want as outcomes within it. Spending time in building the process and training. So the first part of that process, we're talking about usually these processes that they roll out, anywhere from 6, 7, 8 months to get there. Considerable time is spent in building that process to get the group to function as a team and as a committee, as opposed to a collection of individuals bringing their ideas. So that's part of the orientation, the training, and building the process in terms of where you want to go. Yes, we lost some people in the early stages when they realized this is not what I thought it was going to be. Okay, and in terms of it, and very often you see in groups you consider the facilitator as kind of your police in the process. The group was charged with the responsibility of policing themselves. You need your ground rules here that you can all agree into, and how you're going to enforce those, and what are your do's and what are your don'ts. And let me tell you what is, best practices in this, in the process as a facilitator. As we work through that, that group began to gel, and that helped to keep it from being the political. We also knew it had co-facilitators. We know that one of those facilitators, in order to be accepted by the community, had to be one that was highly recognized and respected within the community. So we selected a retired judge that was well known, and he agreed to come on as one of the co-chairs of it. Then we had the other one whom we knew who was ground zero for the activities that was taking place around the death of Trayvon Martin, which was a pastor and in the Methodist Church. That's where the meetings was held. She was the leader. We knew she needed to be at the table. She was going to be holding meetings as we went forward. Those two became the co-chairs. And interestingly, because it was as far apart as you could get two people who came together and worked as the co-chairs of that, keeping that community, keeping that committee together. So it's work. First of all, this process is a lot of work, and it's a building process as you go along. The committee had to own the committee and the process that they were going to use, so that they would take the responsibilities for seeing that it got carried out. Okay. I think I've answered that one, and then I'll spend some more time. The facilitator of this process was from UCF, and she was the director of the Law and Policy program there. And we spent a lot of time just in planning, laying out selection of the individuals to participate. Looked at a number of other studies that had been done by the RAND Corporation, and others, and designed this process. The process, I said, it was about 8 months. Then it came up with 26 recommendations. The committee not only signed on for to complete the Blue Ribbon Panel, to complete the oversight, the assessment of the police department, coming up with the recommendations, but also to monitor. So the police department, they had 100% cooperation from the police department. If they wanted to see complaints that had been filed over the last 5 years, those complaints were produced, and somebody came in and made a report from the department to the panel. And I think the panel was surprised when they realized the kind of authority that the city and the commission had passed on and invested in them to get to the bottom of where they believed there were issues and challenges. Now, we had that process. Out of those recommendations, the police department followed through. There was a 6-month report on progress. There was a 12-month report. There was an 18-month report and 24 months. We went out 2 years and reports and follow up on those recommendations. Out of those 26 recommendations, I believe it was 22 of them that that the police department actually fulfilled and reported back to the community. So I think I'm probably out of time here. I'm running over. Next slide. I think that's okay. Are there any questions?
I encourage a lot of you to, even if you're not going to ask the question off your mic, if you would like to even type a question, this event is about community engagement, and a big part of community engagement is communication and conversation. This event was not just meant to present different ideas to you guys, but also to hear what you have to say. So if you do have any questions, whether that be typed or you unmuting, please feel free to ask. Okay, well, we will move forward. Our speaker, who was unfortunately not able to make it with us, was Rhonda Boyd, and she was going to be talking about the citizen planning advisory committees. In her place, we would like Ms. Miller, who I introduced to you at the beginning, to just discuss what is a CPAC, what is a Citizen Planning Advisory Committee, and what are some of the stuff that goes around it, and moving forward, how can we utilize that here in the city of Jacksonville better, to where we can have effective communication between citizen and local government.
Thank you, Solomon. And thank you for letting me know I'm going to fill in for Rhonda. I have been taking some notes because I've been so interested in community involvement the entire time I've been involved with ethics in the city of Jacksonville. A lot of times when people get frustrated with what's going on in the community, they call the ethics hotline. So I've talked to a lot of people who have concerns about the Neighborhood Bill of Rights and how do they interact with the city. In fact, the ethics office had a project with the League of Women Voters, and the president of the League of Women Voters is on this call with us, Linnell. Hi, Linnell. The League of Women Voters joined with us to do a citizen education course on how do you interact with your government and how do you register to vote. And I would say, in listening to all the good ideas from Robert and Andrew, I would say that a lot of these elements we already have in Jacksonville, like police community relations, task forces, town halls, participatory budgets, voter education, volunteer fairs. Almost every aspect of what you mentioned, Robert, we have had in Jacksonville, but the problem is that it's been sporadic. It's not part of an overall plan. Someone gets a bright idea, they do it that week. Oh, great, but in order to get forward movement, you have to have some kind of cohesive plan that's ongoing. So I think Jacksonville, and our population is close to 900,000. I wish we were the size of Sanford, like about 60,000, because I think it'd be easier to organize. We are so spread out here, and we have just so many different groups in the city. So to talk about the CPACs, one of the things that I think is really encouraging about Jacksonville is that we already have a structure, the citizen CPACs. It was set up so that, like, you didn't have 1,000 citizens coming into City Hall. I mean, that would be pretty overwhelming. You know, that you actually got neighborhoods grouped and you worked with those groups to really facilitate them communicating with the government. Those CPACs have been operating for decades. I train them every year on ethics. And what I hear from all the chairs is that they don't have the backup that they need from the city. So what we've got, which is great, is we've got this great infrastructure of these CPAC meetings. And I've been out to every one of them across the city. The city provides space, they provide resources, they provide staff, you know, for copying and for getting out information. At a CPAC meeting, and they are typically every month, but the CPACs will have a city staff person there. They'll have the police officer or several from that area attend the meeting. They'll have someone from the planning department, and any city official that CPAC wants to hear from will be produced. You know, so we've actually got that structure in the city now. What's interesting is I've received complaints over the years on the Neighborhood Bill of Rights. So I looked into it and I found the Neighborhood Bill of Rights. It's not easy to find, but I found it. And it's got these great rights. They're really aspirational. Like, wouldn't it be nice if we could get responses to requests for information within 24 hours? Yeah, that'd be great. You know, we shoot for that. Wouldn't it be great if we could do this and this and this? So someone put that Neighborhood Bill of Rights together as an aspirational, feel-good type document. But what I saw in the ethics office is that citizens read it and they would rely upon it, like, hey, this gives us some rights. No, it doesn't. It just says here's what we'd like the city to be like. But it was not enforceable. So it was, I think, poorly drafted. You don't want to draft documents like that because it's confusing to people. I just found out that the CPACs, all of our citizen groups, as valuable as they are, and they're already operating, we've got the structure going, we've got city staff, we've got a whole office to get them going. That's not codified either in our local code, which is a problem because that means it's in a mayor's executive order. It could be just changed one day. New mayor comes in, says, you know, we don't have the budget for this. You know, so I think every concern that's been voiced is valid. It needs to be pulled together in Jacksonville. We have so many elements already in place, but they're not coordinated. So I would say, just like Andrew had a blue ribbon committee in Sanford, we could have a blue ribbon committee with all of our CPACs, like a citywide CPAC meeting, and we could pull together all of the people that have been battling that out in their communities and say, what do you need? What do you need? And all of the other efforts, like the police department have, the sheriff has already implemented several citizen committees, outreach to the religious community. You know, so what I see is a lot of well-intentioned sporadic efforts that need to be pulled together into a cohesive whole. And we already have the city infrastructure to do that. So I think implementation of a strong CPAC law that codifies our CPAC so that they are permanent and gives them more powers to pull things together for the city, I think would be really useful from my perspective in the city.
Go ahead, Dennis.
Thank you. I just wanted to add, appreciate Carla's input and all the work that she has done as our ethics director. You know, a complaint was filed with the city through the Inspector General's office, and working with the General Counsel's office, they declared that the Neighborhood Bill of Rights was not law. And that was the genesis for the CPAC. So at this point, I just echo what Carla was saying. They could be gone tomorrow. And we're working on a draft revision of the Neighborhood Bill of Rights and hoping that we can get some support from the City Council and deal with any of the issues that Carla raised in terms of enforceability, so that we have something that actually works and will work for the citizenry. It's really important to remember that the consolidation, which happened 50 years ago, realized that this was a very large area that they were turning into a municipality, and that there would be problems. And to date, there are parts of the city that have the same problems that they had 50 years ago in terms of infrastructure, poverty, health issues, social determinant neglect. So that's one of the reasons we're having these meetings, to move towards a process that works the way it was envisioned when the Neighborhood Bill of Rights was passed. And I really appreciate Andrew Thomas and Bob Jones sharing their experience.
We had a question from Miss Deborah Thompson. She asked, how do you get the city to buy into a process to complete a study that spans several administrations and not get ditched or defunded because it's not priority to an incoming administration? And I guess this could be to any of our speakers who have talked so far. Any of you want to chime in, feel free.
This is Bob Jones. I thought Carla, hit the nail on the head with codifying the CPAC process, but that won't solve totally the issue of one administration to the next. But the codifying the CPAC process and enhancing the ability of the CPACs to function and measure the improvements that they are able to get for their planning districts. So one is codified what is surprisingly not codified yet, the CPAC process, which there's been an enormous investment of citizens' time and of resources from the city. So the other piece of this is it's always problematic when transitions happen from either from one party to another or from one leader to another. And to the extent you can have more institutionalized efforts to be able to continue the work. But I would say the first answer is make certain that the CPAC process is codified. And by the way, you have a lot of experience and you could probably figure out how to improve that process.
And if I may, I agree with Bob on that. I would add to, in addition to the codification of it and codes, when they talk about the work in building a process and the stakeholders, your elected officials and commissioners are your stakeholders and part of that building process. And working with the first, when you don't see a problem, you're not going to try and correct it. And if you see a problem as somebody else's problem, let them take care of it. And helping to understand that if there's a problem, what is the problem? And it didn't occur on your watch because I had that. We're talking about situations that go back 50, 100 years. I had nothing to do with that. Then let's not talk about whether or not you had something to do with that. Let's talk about your perception of what happened. How do you view that? Are you okay with that? Because that sends a message to your community. Or no, well, that was wrong. That never should have happened. Then are you willing to say that? And if you're willing to say that it was wrong and it shouldn't have happened, then the question is going to be asked, then what are you going to do to correct it? And that's when you have the opportunity. It's not didn't happen on your watch. If you're in the position, you can apologize for what happened. But once you get movement from your elected officials, your commissioners, because I tell you the things I talked about with the commissioners, and although we was dealing with the death of Trayvon, what was really there's underpinning, and that's the tipping point. You have issues that are supporting that. And when I went back and talked about, so what are the effects and what are we dealing with here? And what I did for them, I call it my conflict tree analysis. And I said, here's some of the things that's still active in your community, although you're pulling, sometimes they're doing the ostrich thing. You stick your head in the sand and you think everything is going to go by. And I said, but like with the ostrich, when you stick your head in the sand, your butt's exposed and you still have issues that you think have been resolved that haven't. And I went back and I said, I'm new, I'm a transplant to the Sanford community, but I knew from the time that I was there, I kept hearing the injustice within the law enforcement, within the city administration. There was polarizations within the community. There was, I mean, blatant distrust of city officials, distrust of the law enforcement, poor police community relations. And you start walking through, oh yeah, 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 yeah. Is that okay? So this is the work you're doing with them, their entitlement, the loss of the history in the community, and like in the Goldsboro and in so many cities. What are you doing about that? Then we talked about people not being valued, disempowered, and tension. And I said, and what that leads to is when you have these confrontations within your community, it's coming from that free-floating anger from all of these things that have built up over the years. And all of that came to a head with Trayvon Martin. But this is what you're dealing with. People will tell you got a high rate of unsolved crimes within the communities. I was already looking at that. They were looking at a 5-year history in the community saying, these are people of color. What's happened? These crimes have not been resolved. And they would bet and say that if it was a white person and not a person of color, they would have been resolved. So you place a low value on their lives. There was minimal investment in the communities. I hear you talking about the distressed communities, within Jacksonville. Most major metropolitan communities have them. That's a high unemployment rate. You've got that going on. The schools, kids, I mean, usually in your distressed neighborhoods, kids don't register and get enrolled in school on time. So you've got these issues going on. What are you going to do about them? And you may say, that's okay. And if you're saying that's okay, then understand that there are going to be repercussions and consequences. When people are protesting, when people are rallying, when people are marching, all it takes is one more issue because they've already got up the head of steam and they're going to march. What else should we be marching and protesting about? So I think those are the conversations that you're having with your elected officials and affecting change. Is an opportunity. You can do something about that. Now, what do you want to do about it? And I agree with you, Carla, in terms of you have to have a plan. Somebody's got to be in charge of that plan. And the community at large has got to see some progress. Things have to happen. So, again, excuse me for being long-winded.
Ms. Miller, I see your hands raised, so feel free to speak.
Yeah, right. I wanted to specifically respond to Deborah's question about completing a study that spans several administrations, because I don't know of any like that that have spanned several administrations, because typically if a study is started, they want to finish it within that mayor's term so that they can wrap it up with a bow, take a bow, and have accomplished something. I'm not familiar with any that have gone so long. Is there a specific one? And you can just text that and I'll follow up on that. With you, because I'm just not familiar with that.
Solomon. So one example of one that spanned about 9 years, and 2 mayors and then now a 3rd mayor, is that city of service model in Miami that was, the plan was created in the early part of Mayor Regalado's term. And then Mayor Suarez followed, and I believe another mayor. So that was at least successful in that the investment in that effort was continued to at least the next administration and I think beyond.
Mhm.
So now that we've kind of went through all of our presentations, we wanted to just take a couple of minutes to just have an open discussion about any of the presentations that we saw today. And I believe, Ms. Miller, did you answer Linnell Philman's question?
Well, I thought it was actually Deborah's question initially on the city buying into a process.
Okay.
Yeah. And Linnell's question is, as usual, very insightful, and I would probably take a whole seminar just to pick apart the 100 studies that dust the shelves in Jacksonville, that brilliant people got together, spent hundreds of hours of volunteer time, and now it makes for a nice door prop or something. That the implementation is always the problem, you know, like, and you actually have to have a city structure like the CPACs, like the office of the CPACs. You must report to city council every year on which objectives are being met, because nobody wants to be embarrassed if they have to go and do a report in front of the city council. But unless you have some accountability, the recommendations of all of our, like the Charter Revision Commission, there's like the Ethics Commission, there's many people making great recommendations. But unless there's that accountability to hold people's feet to the fire, it's not going to get done, just because of human nature. Not any bad intent on anybody, but it's not my problem. I wasn't charged with implementing this plan. You have to charge someone with implementing it and then have them have repercussions if they don't actually do something with it. And we don't do that. We don't have that piece in our reports. But we've got lots of really well-written reports for the city identifying the problem.
Hi, Solomon. This is Deborah Thompson.
Hello.
How are you? Sorry.
I'm doing all right.
Yeah, I was I was working with 2 screens, so I apologize. But what I was really referring to was what you've already addressed in some way or another, but we've not really solved the problem. And that is, I mean, I've sat on a lot of studies, the JCCI studies I see someone put up here. And we had the, under the Better Jacksonville plan, we had a couple of studies. We had a blueprint for Jacksonville and several others that I can't think of the names of, the proper names at this time. But dating back to the citizen participation process under the Community Development Block Grants funds, and Jacksonville is an entitlement city that gets funds directly from the federal government. Those HUD rules, regulations, and guidelines, in my opinion, were almost totally ignored in the total process. And that, I think, is the issue for how administrations can get away with not really following all of the guidelines, as long, so there must be something in there. If they follow 50% of them, then they can still get funded, because that funding was supposed to be held up for various projects, housing, roads and bridges, curbs and gutters, ditches, and flooding that was going on in Jacksonville. And as long as they did some of the neighborhoods, then that was fine. But there, when I came to Jacksonville, 45th and Moncrief was flooding. It still floods. And then, you know, we've put some infrastructure over there. They've done some things, but it's not cleared up the problem. But in the whole consolidation process, they wanted to bring all of that land area into the Duval County and under the city's auspices, but then did not want to because most of those outlying areas at that time, those were rural areas outside of 45th and US 1 and that kind of thing. They were not a part of the city's budget. And the community development block grant funds and what do you call it? Vying for funds each year. I mean, we got the funds in, but they were never put into some of the places where they were written into the actual application to go.
Yes, I mean, I definitely see where you're coming from with that. As far as where I guess the question would be like, how do we make it?
Go from here, yeah, because it's been so many years now, we can pass the buck to people who already passed away.
Yeah.
Past administrations, past city council people, past mayors, administrators, whatever. Those people have all gone now. I mean, we've had a citizen participation process where citizens, neighborhood operations, we had a whole slew for years of neighborhood operations before the CPACs, that all the neighborhoods were organized and had to develop themselves into a respected type of organization that would come to the city and at least make presentations. And we've done all that. But it's all, it's still a case of, talk, talk, talk. When do you really actually eat?
Yeah. And just that's all of that. I totally agree with you on. And it's one of those things where again, that's why we're coming together with this, where it's like, how do we figure out different models that will last past administrations, past party lines, and stuff like the civic infrastructure models, and hope maybe an improved CPAC. We don't know. Hopefully those would be options that Jacksonville moving forward could take. I think those comments, Ms. Thompson, kind of help lead into these key discussion questions that we have here. And just to further discuss, we're going to break up into breakout rooms to discuss these questions, and if possible, have at least one representative from each group just discuss what all you discussed, whether it's focused on one question, whether you answered all three. Just what were your thoughts? What are your opinions moving forward with these questions? The breakouts will be about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we will reconvene to further this open discussion and conclude. Once we break out, I'm really encouraging everybody to just, even if it's one or two comments, your opinion matters, because it's the people of Jacksonville who are going to help us move forward. We need to know what problems are presented and how. The only way we can solve problems is by first acknowledging them, trying to figure out how to resolve them, and move forward as a united front. So I'm asking, once we break out into these breakout rooms, that there be fruitful discussion. Dennis, if you can begin those breakout rooms, please. Right. Good, everybody. We have everyone back, Dennis? You're muted.
Yes, we do.
Great. So I guess I'll go ahead and just start off from what we discussed in my breakout room. If you could you put up those key discussion questions, Keziah? So the first discussion question we talked about dealt with the civic infrastructure models, and what could Jacksonville consider to applying for improving community engagement within the city. And Ms. Thompson brought up a great point that at this point, from her perspective, it comes down to implementation and execution. We've had several programs within the Jacksonville community that were good for the community, but in the long run, because of poor execution, poor implementation, they fell to the wayside. And that's one of the reasons why she brought up that question of, okay, how do we keep stuff in place past administrative lines? And just moving forward in the discussion, we talked about how like the average citizen doesn't have as much time to move forward in finding where to bring up their complaints that they might have in their neighborhood, which causes nothing really to happen for their communities. One thing that Matthew Durden brought up was he's lived in Jacksonville for 8 years now, and just from being associated with the JUL this year, he's just found out about the CPACs and what they are. So if that's even proof of where we're going with this, as far as what needs to be improved, communicative lines need to be improved. We need more training for leaders within these CPACs or within these infrastructure models for it to effectively last throughout administrations. And it comes down really to just responsibility. One thing Ms. Thompson brought up was that there's several places within the Jacksonville community that the complaints have been brought to who they need to be brought to, but nothing has happened. They're still complaining about the same things, and to no fault of their own. It just comes down to simple things from trash pickup or, road repair, even community centers. There was one point in Jacksonville where every neighborhood had community centers that people could go to with simple problems that they might have. Now you ask certain people in Jacksonville, where do you go for, if you have an issue in your neighborhood, where do you go? A lot of people can't give you an answer to that. And if they can, again, time comes into play, where, okay, I'm gonna go present something to the city. I'll wait 30 minutes for my 3-minute complaint. How effective is that going to be for a lot of people? Moving forward, we talk more about for the CPACs. Matt brought up that one thing that he sees that could be improved is there being a citizen panel that acts as an intermediary between the city council and the CPAC. Why this would be effective is because it allows for an improved line of communication. Well, as he brought up, some citizens don't even know about their CPAC, let alone who runs the CPAC. And as far as meetings go, that's brought up on the CPAC website, which if a citizen doesn't know about the CPAC, well, it makes you think they're going to know about the CPAC website. So it just comes down to different things like that, improvements in communication, and realizing that access is not a given for everyone.
So Solomon, just playing timekeeper, you were
Yeah.
in room 3. Why don't we jump to room 2?
Of course.
Would someone like to speak? That was the room with Andrew Thomas, Linnell Philman, Michelle Hawley, and Robert Jones. Someone like to speak?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michelle Hawley. The group talked about a little more about the makeup of Jacksonville and the challenges that come with the 6 planning districts, 200 neighborhoods, and you know what infrastructure, what organizations are there to help us move forward. There was a discussion of the CPACs, and we also discussed the knowledge of the CPACs, what they had done, and also, you know, what kind of connection there is between the two and in between the CPACs, and how that may be able to impact things moving forward. You know, perhaps that there was one core concept that could, you know, engage those communities to come together to start the work that needs to be done in Jacksonville. You know, and then again, other ways to, the question had come up before about moving away from the political, and how do you move those conversations from having political motivations or other agendas. And so, you know, the importance of maybe that pre-planning, facilitators and having facilitators with the correct mindset and training to pull those conversations together and make sure everybody's working towards that, you know, working towards a goal.
Good, Michelle.
And so then we have room 4.
I'll speak for room 4. We had a good discussion. Faith was concerned about the implementation of the Neighborhood Bill of Rights, which led into how can that be done through the structure of the CPACs. Donna was echoing some of the other comments, concerned about where do citizens go, where can they create public spaces where they can interact. What does the city provide for that? Interestingly, Jocelyn is retired but used to work for the Florida Department of Health, and she was their representative to 4 of the CPACs. So she was pretty much on top of what CPACs were in the past. They had days of glory where they were very much involved, and every CPAC had their own city staff person, and that sort of drifted away. So we talked about how can we bump that up again and make them responsible to make sure that people's hopes don't get dashed. Like, you bring an issue up, you talk about it, and someone says, well, I'll handle that. And then you never hear anything about it. There's no feedback, no closing the loop. And so people get discouraged when that kind of thing happens. So how do you actually have follow through on that your concerns are going to be addressed? The other thing that I thought Jocelyn offered, which is so true, is that the CPACs need to not only have structure, but they need to have training. And I know I do the ethics training for them, but you know, it's kind of built up like, well, we need training on how to run a meeting. We need training on this. So, I mean, we really need to do capacity building of the people that are in our citizen groups already. And I guess the next steps, the third question, really, this was my contribution, which is as far as Neighborhood Bill of Rights, we need to do a legal analysis of that, which Solomon and his group is already chewing on. Like, what can we actually implement from the Neighborhood Bill of Rights? How does that match up to real citizen concerns? And how can we, if we're really, I would think, clever about this, we would take the CPACs, the citizen groups that already exist, codify them, give them a strong structure, and then pull in the essential Bill of Rights issues that we need to enforce and kind of wrap it all up into one really strong piece of legislation. I think that would be something very successful with City Council.
Thank you. And just a reminder, all of this is being recorded. We'll have a transcript and we can begin to put these ideas together. We have just a few more minutes for room 5, and that's Keziah Anderson, Nicola Steelnack, and Tyree Williams. Anyone like to join us from that group?
I'll make a comment. I think just coming from previously working with Jocelyn at the Florida Department of Health, I wasn't aware of the CPAC. So I think really just the next generation being aware of what CPACs are, what they do, and also being involved. And then also maybe how do we leverage or engage social service organizations that work in these communities? Because these organizations touch a lot of these different residents, and they would be great sources of information or sources of collecting information about these different groups, and also just a way for them to get their voice out as well. So I just wanted to make that point. That was something that I wanted to add.
Thank you, Tyree. Back over to you, to Solomon.
Yes. Before I close, Mr. Akins was not able to really get to say much because he came in a little bit later. So I just wanted to give the floor to you if there was anything from these questions, any feedback or opinions you wanted to give.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, no, I was here, I'm at work and I was kind of multitasking, but I really enjoyed the dialogue and the discussion today. And there's something really more that I would want to, add in.
Okay.
All right, but thank you so much. I appreciate it.
No worries. Could we go on to the next slide? So I just want to take this moment on behalf of the Jacksonville Urban League to just thank all of you for coming out and just having this discussion. I wish, like Ms. Philman brought up, I wish that we would have had some representatives here to discuss with us these serious problems in our neighborhoods. And hopefully in the future events we will. Our past events we did. So I know it's promising that we'll be able to do that. But I just like to thank all of you for coming out and participating. The first step in successful community engagement is communication, whether that be positive or sometimes maybe negative. Communication is necessary in order to figure out what are some of the problems and challenges that we all face together in our neighborhoods. Before I let all of you go, I would like to give the floor to our president of the Jacksonville Urban League, Dr. Richard Danford. I'm glad you're able to make it and join us. If you have just a few words for our audience.
Thank you. Thank you, Solomon, and to all of our participants, good afternoon. First of all, let me just thank all of you so very much for touching on a very, very important issue here in our community, particularly as it relates to city government and citizens' participation. We're dead serious in terms of doing what we can do as it relates to the Neighborhood Bill of Rights, especially because, you know, for 25 years, we have been led to believe that that it was a legal document. It was a genuine way for citizens to participate in government. And obviously everything was working well until the question was asked, how can citizens become more involved in providing input into the budget process? So when it got down to the actual money part, that's when the backup occurred. And of course, through through the complaint to the Inspector General's office, they spent a good 6-7 months massaging, trying to determine how to respond to the complaint. And of course, it came up with the fact that it had not been codified. It's one of those situations, I would think, where sometimes ordinances and laws may mean shall, but in some cases it also could mean may. So I guess the push to really have to bring this to a head certainly prompted that decision for the fact that it had not been codified. So I'm looking forward to our next steps in terms of making this a very important issue within city government. I think it's the council's responsibility. It was their ordinance. So we need to look certainly to the council as well as the general counsel's office in terms of how we either codify what we have, as the suggestion earlier, you know, look at the CPACs, do some things with it. But we've got to get to the point where citizens have a real opportunity for input into the budget process, not the 3 minutes that several people may have to talk at a city council meeting, but some genuine input. And so with that, then people from every side of the community will have an opportunity to make recommendations, to participate. And I think that's what open and transparent government is all about. So thank all of you for joining us, and we look forward to even more dialogue and work, you know, to make this happen for the citizens of Jacksonville. So thank all of you for joining us.
Thank you, Dr. Danford. And just again, we're very happy that you guys were able to come out and discuss with us some of the stuff, some of the issues and problems that you see and possible solutions moving forward. We plan to have several more of these types of town halls and steps moving forward to eventually be able to present something to the city. But until then, I just want to make sure that all of you guys, before we leave for the evening, that you did fill out that JOT form that Dennis placed. It should be in the chat. He could, Dennis, if you want to put that in again, maybe. But yes, we would really love to hear your feedback on some of those key questions that we presented. Keziah has put it down in the JOT forms, just one click of the link and a couple of questions. We look forward to your attendance on more of our programs, and hopefully moving forward with each program, we have more progress with the city. But thank you again, and I hope all of you have a good evening.
And one thing, just a reminder, this was recorded. It will be available on YouTube and Facebook, and we'll send you links so that you can share it with your colleagues, constituents, friends, family, to get further input. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Carla.
And thanks to our presenters, just did a fabulous job, and all of those that participated, everyone was very helpful. Thank you.